Okay, I'm here. My Spanish has not improved since I came last. I don't know one more word, which is still 0. I feel always so ashamed. But I haven't do anything about it, so what to do?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
You're not my are you my Spanish voice? Do I get translated?
Not me, dear.
Who translates? So he just said it, did he?
Yeah.
So you heard what I said? My apology. It's very nice. All the lamas say that when you're feeling arrogant, you just have to remember something you can't do. And if you're feeling low self-esteem, you remember something you can do. Well, the moment I'm arrogant, I just remember I can't speak Spanish, I can't speak Italian, I can't speak German, and I'm humbled right there. Lama Lundup at Courtin would always purposely talk to me in Tibetan, and I was just completely embarrassed because I didn't understand, you know. So I'm sorry. Okay, I only can speak Australian, okay? Okay. Do we do this first? Yeah. You do all the prayers then, okay. Huh? What, do you like to do certain things? You have a habit to do certain things? What do you do normally? All of this? You do these ones?
Refuge and...
Bodhicitta. And then a mandala? You do a mandala? No? Okay. So you lead. But first, let's think. Let's think, okay? Let's think. Why are we sitting here? This is what is expressed in this prayer. Why we are sitting here is because we want to listen to Buddha's teachings in the particular manner of our lamas, you know, in this Tibetan style, so that we can take some tools from it. It's got to be practical, you know. We've got to see if there's something useful we're listening to, and then we make commitment to try it. It's like cooking class. If you never got a recipe, you'd get very upset with me. You've got to get recipes. And why do we want these recipes? To develop our own amazing potential. And even why do we want to do this? So we can be of benefit to others. This is the long-term purpose, all the way to bodhicitta. This is why we're listening to these teachings. This is our purpose. So we can sing the prayer that expresses that. And then, you know, the first part of the prayer actually is reminding us of our reliance on the Buddha. The second part expresses this altruistic motivation. Okay. You do it in Spanish or Tibetan?
Yes, Spanish.
Okay, go.
Voy por refugio hasta alcanzar la iluminación, al Buda, al Dharma, a la Asamblea Suprema, por los méritos que acumule practicando la generosidad y demás perfecciones que pueda obtener el estado de Buda para beneficiar a todos los seres. Voy por refugio hasta alcanzar la iluminación, al Buda, al Dharma y a la Asamblea Suprema, por los méritos que acumule practicando la generosidad y demás perfecciones que pueda obtener el estado de Buda para beneficiar a todos los seres. Voy por refugio hasta alcanzar la iluminación, al Buda, al Dharma y a la Asamblea Suprema, por los méritos que acumule practicando la generosidad y demás perfecciones, que pueda obtener el estado de Buda para beneficiar a todos los seres.
So I think it's auspicious for our time together that we make a mandala offering to the Buddha as if the Buddha were here himself, as a request for the teachings. So if we don't know the contents of the universe according to Buddha's cosmology, which is what the prayer states, then we don't worry. We just imagine the contents of the universe as we know it, our samsaric universe, you know, all the nice things, the smells, the taste, the food, the diamonds, the handbags, whatever's beautiful, whatever we like. We pile them all up and we offer them to the Buddha as a request for the teachings. It's auspicious to offer something before we receive it, isn't it? It has great meaning.
Esta tierra ungida con perfume y regada de flores, con el monte Meru, los 4 continentes, el sol y la luna, vista como una tierra pura de Budas, yo te ofrezco, que todos los seres puedan gozar de una tierra así. Oh sagrado y venerable Lama, desde las nubes de compasión que se forman en los cielos de tu sabiduría dharmakāyika, por favor, derrama una lluvia de Dharma vasto y profundo, de acuerdo precisamente con las necesidades de los que serán adiestrados. Idam Guru Rana Mandala Kaniyatayami.
Okay, well, this strange Tibetan concept of the 8 worldly concerns, you know, I don't know who invented it. I don't know where it comes from. The evolution of it. Is it Tsongkhapa? I don't know. Does anyone know who created this weird phrase? Who's done this study that well? How far back does it go? It's Tibetan, isn't it? Maybe Atisha? Maybe Tsongkhapa? I don't know. Because if you hear it, 8 worldly concerns, it kind of sounds rather boring, doesn't it? You know, it doesn't sound very exciting. And then who would think that actually it means attachment, you know? I mean, when you look at the packaging of the teachings, the Lam Rim, this course to enlightenment, this medieval Tibetan phrase, Lam Rim, gradual path, better for us in our mind, we call it a course, that's what it means. In the first stages, we learn to control our body and speech. And then in the second part, like the middle scope, or high school, I like to call it, this is where we learn to look at the cause of problems. The root cause of problems is all these neuroses in our mind, the delusions. So it's here where we look really deeply into the various delusions. And this is where we need to understand the mind. This is, as Lama Zopa Rinpoche puts it, this is where we learn to be our own psychologist. This is the Buddha's essential point. This is Buddha's unique approach, you know. In the first stages of practice, where Buddha gets us, where Atisha, based on his Lam Rim, and where on his text, the lamp for the path, which Tsongkhapa comments on, and this is the big one for Tsongkhapa, this first stages, he's merely asking us to control our body and our speech. Doing what your grandmother told you, basically, behave nicely. That's the first stage of practice, which we don't even think of as Buddhist. I mean, good communists behave nicely. Good Christians behave nicely. It's about our behavior. But the second part, high school, which I call it, the second scope, the middle scope, this is where we really get into Buddha's intent, Buddha's unique approach to why we suffer. In order to investigate, in order to become free of suffering, he says we've got to look at the root causes of suffering, the actual causes of suffering, the main causes of suffering. And this is the mind. And in the mind, in our mental consciousness, within the 3 categories of states of mind, Buddhist psychology is pretty straightforward. Positive states of mind, negative states of mind, and then those states of mind we can call neutral or neither of those. Many other states of mind. We have hundreds of states of mind, thousands. But this simple way of dividing the contents of our own mind, which if we don't really know, we're not really being a Buddhist. You'd have to say that. The unique approach of Buddha is that the neuroses in our mind, these delusions, these negative states of mind, these afflictions, all these words that are used, these are the cause of suffering. And of course the point that Buddha's making, this outrageous point that Buddha's making, is that these do not belong in our mind. And the job of going on this course to enlightenment, you know, is to remove these delusions from our mind. If you finally accomplish Buddhahood, when you graduate on this course, on this Lam Rim, what you've done is completely remove, even to the subtlest degree, all negativity. And this is Buddha's incredible point, which is unique to the Buddha. That in this mind of ours, these negative states of mind, the word they use in the English word, we don't use it much in our lives, you've got to look up your dictionary, is that they're adventitious. It means they're not at the core of our being. This is a huge point to understand. This is why we are going on this road to Buddhahood. Because the word Buddha in Tibetan, Sangye, the first syllable implies this point, the complete eradication from our mind, the total elimination from our minds of all negativity, of all the negative states of mind, the negative states of mind. It's a very simple way of categorizing. And it's not a moralistic statement, it's a technical term. And then the second syllable, Sangye, Gye, Buddha, this implies the complete development of all the positive qualities, the positive states of mind. It seems very simple, you know, kind of all very nice morality, positive states of mind, negative states of mind. You know, Western modern psychology seems so much more sophisticated. Buddhist psychology is outrageous, extraordinary. He says the negative states of mind, and we all know them, jealousy, anger, low self-esteem. The root one being ego grasping, which gives rise to the main one as a result of ego grasping, this neurotic, the primordial main one, the root delusion, this primordial instinctive clinging to a neurotic sense of self. And on the basis of this, effectively the main one in daily life, this frantic, junky attachment to get what that fantasy I wants. This runs us. This is the motor that propels us through our life, second by second, day by day, life by life. This is the main one, attachment. This simple, simple word, you know. So it's in the middle scope that we learn about this attachment in great depth. And here, mainly, it's attachment to the sense objects. We learn to control, to harness our crazy energy, to stop being attached, to get to understand this attachment, not to be caught up in the drama of all the objects of the senses, you know, in this desire realm that we occupy. This is already a huge job, but this is the gross level of attachment. So it's in the great scope, in the Mahayana component of the path, in the Bodhisattva wing, at a far more advanced level of teachings that the lamas tell us about this other subtler level of attachment. Much subtler level of attachment that you wouldn't possibly begin to understand unless you've done the earlier work, you know. And this is this little grouping of the 8 worldly concerns. It's 8 different ways that attachment works at a much more primordial level. So we won't really, I mean, we talk about it, you know, 1 minute we'll talk about practicing karma and controlling our body, and the next minute talk about the 8 worldly dharmas. Well, controlling your body is junior school, the first scope. Controlling your mind is high school, the middle scope, and 8 worldly dharmas is most advanced, most advanced. So unless we've done the earlier work, we won't be able to even hear these teachings, you know, because it's this primordial level of attachment, every microsecond. And these levels of attachment are at the default mode. They're at the level in our mind of being complete assumptions. The normal world simply never questions them. We can see how maybe, you know, being a junkie for too much food or a junkie for too much sex, we can see we've got a problem with attachment. But these 4, we don't even think of them in our world as a problem. It seems bizarre to think. So what are these 8, you know? It's just attachment, that's all. And they're every microsecond. They're so primordial, like I'm saying, they're at the level of assumption. We just don't question them. So it's in 4 pairs, really. It's this complete assumption that happiness is when I get things. So we spend all our energy trying to do this. And then the millisecond we don't, then the assumption is that that's suffering. So with this 8 worldly dharmas, which is taught on this more advanced level of ripping out ego in order to be of benefit to sentient beings, it's taught at the bodhisattva level, then we're trying to literally reverse it. And it's all taught as well in the context of transforming problems. In other words, learning to see that, in fact, trying to change the attachment to actually be happy when you don't get things. Then it gets more subtle as you go along. The second one, which seems such an assumption, it seems unfair to think that this is weird, you know. This is this assumption that being in our comfort zone, feeling good, being comfortable, feeling good, that's what happiness is. And then the assumption that when you're not feeling good, that's suffering. Or in other words, we're attached totally every microsecond to feeling comfortable, and we are attached to being free of being uncomfortable. We're totally attached every second to get things, and we're constantly attached to being free of not getting things. It gets even more subtle, and these last 2, I think, are the ones. I mean, these last 3 especially, it seems to me. The 4th one is the most primordial, the hardest to see. The 3rd one is bad enough. The 3rd one is this total attachment every second to hear nice words with our name in it. We might not think we are attached to this, but the more we go inside, the more we see our minds, the more we can see this one. That it propels us every second. The desperate need to hear nice words with our name in it. That's called praise. And then the pain and suffering if we get the opposite. Now, this in the world, you know, is considered necessary, not just wrong. It's not considered a delusion. It's actually considered necessary. So, in one sense, we can understand this. You know, if you've got a child, your job is to love it. It is to be kind. It is to want the child to be happy. So that it would include praising your child, and it would include not abusing your child. Of course, it would. There's no question. So we shouldn't misunderstand this. What the difference here is, we're trying to see our craving to hear praise, and our craving not is to hear insulting words, not to hear insulting words. We're looking at the attachment to these things. not at the reasonableness of these, and in fact, from the point of view of being good to sentient beings, the necessity to do this, but based on wisdom, the depth of our need to hear this. And the fourth one really puts it in perspective, because this is the deepest and the hardest to see. They call it attachment to reputation, which sounds kind of peculiar. We don't think we're attached to a big reputation, But this is the one that governs us every single second. We are desperate to be seen as good by others. And it is unbearable when we're not seen as good. That's what it means by reputation. Praise to nice words is one thing, but this is even more primordial, even more craven. And it is really quite, if we've never really looked at our minds, if we've never looked at really the meaning of attachment in the lower levels, attachment to the gross objects of the senses, this one just seems so abstract to us. It really does. And this is why, not for nothing, it's taught at the level in the Bodhisattva path, at the deeper level, assuming already we've done some work on our minds. So there's one of reputation, and we just use it, just look at it in an ordinary way, I mean, for example, look at the way we get lonely. Look at what we call loneliness. Well, if we analyze that from the perspective of attachment, it's really clear what it is. It's the fourth. It's the attachment to reputation. So when we look into it, we listen to our thoughts going all the time. You're driving home, and you see something unusual. That second, you're telling somebody about it. That second. And then if you have no one to go home to tell, then that's what you call loneliness. So all the things that go on our mind, the constant conversation, first of all, the central player is I, and it's always in reference to others. So why we have this desperate need, for example, this is what the attachment to reputation is referring to, this desperate need. I mean, we're not talking normal human communication, and it's very hard for us to distinguish between normal human communication, which is based on compassion. We're talking at the normal human communication here based on attachment, which is what runs most of us. It's this neurotic need to be heard by somebody, to tell people what I think. Always in our head we're doing this. So when in the house we live with people, and we're living with people all the time, so it's very hard to see this because it's there all the time. We have this need to be seen by others. We have a need for a person to see that I'm washing the dishes, that I did do this job, that I did that I achieved this. We need to tell people. We need people to hear it. And we have to ask ourselves why. Because this is the point of this attachment. It's such mental illness. It's because this is almost, to me it seems, the closest to this one of ego, the root delusion, that we have such a limited sense of who we really are, that unless other people hear me, see me, as well as praise me, think I'm good, we don't think we're valid, So we are desperate to be seen as good by others. And of course, we are desperate to hide our bad qualities. This is, even if we look, it seems to me, if we look right at the basics in Buddhist teachings, right at the fundamentals, at the very beginning, the Lamrim, and we look at Lord Buddha's listing of the 10 non-virtues, this little checklist, of 10 don'ts. He says, don't kill, don't lie, don't steal, don't this, don't that. Reasonable advice. So the usual way we think, let's say we've come from a Catholic or a Christian or Muslim, whatever, I'm an ex-Catholic background, then our normal view based on that of morality, and this is the point, is that what a sin is, by definition, is what God said not to do. Now, you don't have, if you're not a Christian, maybe you've just been a regular old materialist. Well, the view of morality in our ordinary world is what mummy says you shouldn't do. That's what defines an action as bad. Or the world says, or the judge says, or the police say, or the government say. So, do you see what I'm saying? We assume immorality is doing something wrong, and what something wrong is what someone else says is wrong. This is certainly the Christian teaching. This is certainly the view of a creator. Well, Buddha really is looking at this, and he says this is a dualistic view. It's not like that. He says, and this is a crucial step from day one to understand this, that what morality is for the Buddha is an action immorality, a negative action, a sin, whatever you want to call it, is necessarily an action that harms another. You don't need, we don't need a person to, if you're a Christian, it makes sense. God creates the universe. God creates me. God creates the laws, So necessarily morality is doing what God said. So this is what we have. This is really in a way linked to ego, the way we are in the ordinary world with our delusions. We want to be praised for doing something good because we assume that's what a good girl is. You're a good girl. You've just did the right thing, but we're not satisfied with that. This is the view of morality in Buddhism. It doesn't matter whether anyone sees you do something virtuous. My mother used to say, a Catholic, virtue has its own rewards. This is very powerful. But look how we're not satisfied to do a good thing. We desperately need to be seen to do a good thing. We want to be praised for doing a good thing, and we want to have a good reputation for doing a good thing. In fact, look at our world in general, what success means, whether it's among your friends or in the world in general. It's someone else saying you are good. So this is really Buddha's understanding. This is all linked to this dualistic view of reality. That we have this sense of a separate self. And so we don't validate ourselves. We define ourselves in terms of something out there. This is for sure the Christian teaching. We define ourselves in terms of being a creation of God. In our house, it's the same. Mummy and Daddy created me, didn't they? And Mummy says, do that, and I'll say, why? Of course she'll say, because I say so. So when I do it, oh, Mummy, I was a good girl, and I want her to praise me. I will feel bereft if she doesn't. That's the one we're talking about. So, of course, like I said, if you are a parent, you should praise because you help the child grow up. But we're talking about attachment here, and this is what we have all the time. So it's seen as a good thing because we can't, in our culture, in the materialist view of the mind, we don't distinguish between, attachment to something and the reasonable level of it. We don't see the difference, and this is what we have to do in being a Buddhist, and it's quite hard unless we understand Buddha's view of the mind, unless we understand the particular characteristics of what attachment is, this neurotic exaggeration of the self and then the things out there. Attachment is this state of mind that over-exaggerates something out there that's delicious and then crave it. So the sensory level is over-exaggerating the deliciousness of a cake. Here at the subtler level, it's over-exaggerating the deliciousness of someone's praise or someone's thinking you're a good person. So, of course, this points to the other one. If Mummy says, you should do this, naturally, if I don't do it and I'm naughty, then I don't want her to know, do I? That's what we call getting away with it, when you don't get caught. So this is our view of morality. Look at our minds. Look at our minds. We assume if you do something wrong, negative, and if no one catches you, then nothing happened. It's like you got away with it. This is bizarre, and this is the point that karma sounds so simple and it's junior school level of Buddha's teachings, but it's really quite profound. It implies emptiness, actually. It implies this non-dualistic view of, the way we are now. This implies we've got to go beyond that, which, of course, is the view of emptiness. It's quite hard to hear it. So it's a bit ridiculous, If you go to the doctor and she says, don't smoke, you might get cancer. And then you go home and you think, oh, well, she won't see me, so I'll smoke. I won't get cancer. We know that's nonsense. It's only when we understand this fundamental point of karma for the Buddha is that whatever that first of all, he establishes what is a negative action. And you can establish it because it's a conventional truth. There's nothing from coming on high. He didn't create it. We do research in this room. We do a survey in this room. We're going to get 100% agreement. We don't like getting killed. We don't like being stolen from. We don't like being punched in the nose. Well, that's what proves what a negative action is, Buddha says. It's a natural thing. It's a natural law. We don't need someone up there to create it and impose it. Again, this is this over-embellishment of things, this dualistic view of a creator, So for the Buddha, a positive action, a negative action is one that harms another. But his point is this. Why at the very beginning he exhorts us not to do it isn't because he says so, which is how it is if you're a Christian. Isn't because he says so. It's because he has found from his own experience that if you kill, you lie, you steal, you harm yourself. And this is where we have to go into detail about understanding exactly how karma works, you know. Are we going to talk about karma throughout the week? Is it on the list? Okay. All right. But never mind, we'll get back and forth, we'll go to it. So, okay. So if we think of this dualistic view of, you know, the Buddha's view of morality, which is a virtuous action is one that benefits another, and a non-virtuous action is one that harms another. And so why Buddha gives us instructions of how to accomplish this, how to stop harming others, and how to benefit others, the initial reason is because that is how you develop yourself. This is the method for you becoming the person you want to become. This is the method for you to cease suffering. This is the point. It's not a moralistic issue, which is our typical view of morality. And we can easily bring this typical view of morality, you know, into our spiritual path. So it's so important to think this through. And that's why karma is so powerful, because it's this incredible view of accountability. We know very well, like I said, about smoking or eating too much. It's not a question of getting away with it. We know perfectly well that's nonsense. It's a natural law that if you eat certain food, you'll get sick. And we know, because we don't want to get sick, then I won't eat that food. That's the same with Buddha's view of morality. We have to know I'm sick of suffering. We have to know I don't want to suffer in the future, because that is the reason not to kill, not to lie, not to steal. So therefore, we can extrapolate here and look at the more advanced levels of attachment and understand this, that who cares who sees me do a good thing? That's not the point. But because we have this dualistic view of morality, then we crave to be seen as a nice person. And of course we crave to be not seen as a bad person, which is why we try to hide our negativity. We can see it, we understand this. And this is very deep inside us. This instinct to not be seen to do something naughty. And the desperate need to be seen to do something good. And at this level, we can see it in all of our relationships. And this is the point about these eight worldly dharmas. What they're trying to point out here is that the eight worldly dharmas run our lives. And it's so embarrassing to hear it. It's so hard to hear it because it's so normal for us. So if we even look at, you know, relationships, like, you know, you fall in love with somebody, well, clearly that's a lot to do with the sexual attachment. It's obvious. But once that calms down, once we start to look at our relationship, it's not that one at all. It's the attachment to be seen by somebody else. Even when it is sexual, it seems to me in a relationship, this is an incredible power thing happening, isn't it, in our relationships, where it's incredibly powerful to be seen as blissful by somebody else. Are you hearing what I'm saying? That is the attachment to being seen as good, being fed. Which is why it's so powerful for us, which is why it is beyond devastating when that partner leaves you. You know, you're with this person, you've taken them for granted, you've been together for 20 years, and then overnight he leaves you for a younger version. This is why the pain is so bad. Not because you probably haven't had sex for 10 years. That's not the issue. Why do you think you suffer so badly? Because we've given our lives to each other, and we have all this assumption of this intimacy, and we see each other every minute, and I tell you what I think, and you tell me what you think, and I approve of you, and you approve of me. That's, you know, and when that's finished, like, it's like your heart has been ripped out and taken with that person. Are you communicating with me? Why do you think, it's not attachment to sex that causes the problem. That's gone. It's not attachment to food. You can get your food anywhere. It's that one. That's why the pain is so intense. It's linked to these subtler levels of attachment. Attachment to praise and attachment to being seen as good, which is what the reputation one means. And we completely crave these two. It seems awful to think we do. We don't believe we do because it's so primordial. We just don't notice. But when you notice when you're with people, you're living with people. I mean, okay, look at the relationship when it starts to go bad, when he starts to be mean to you. The main pain people have when you're fighting, the feeling of pain that you have is that you're not being heard by this other person. Or when you do fall in love and you meet somebody, you feel like you're in bliss because you feel this person hears you, this person sees you. It's incredibly powerful. Don't criticize. But this is the depth of this attachment. The depth of this attachment, which implies that we don't think we're anything in ourselves unless I'm seen and heard by others. This is why we're so hungry for partners, why we get lonely when we don't have them. Can you kind of hear? Or not? I think it's embarrassing when we hear it, because we're all the same, you know. But we don't go to this level normally. We sort of think of attachment as, yeah, well, less money, less sex, I'll try and be a good girl, not too much chocolate cake. That's just the beginning, you know. This is where we still live. This is the really hard one. And there's something that just recently I read. I remember hearing about some Australian nurse in England who'd worked with dying people. And she wrote a book about calling it the 5 greatest regrets among the dying. And this is an interesting point for me. The top regret was the one of not following my heart, not doing what I wanted to do, but doing what I thought other people expected me to do. This is the attachment to reputation. So most of us suffocate what we really want because we're too scared to think it. And this is the good girl, bad girl syndrome. We spend our lives trying to be good girls, which is meaning to do. We hear it and we mistake, we confuse genuine compassion with this attachment to doing what other people think. Because why? Because that is the huge attachment to being seen as a good person. And we are fearful to notice what we really want to do. We're scared to do this because we're scared of what other people think, because we don't want criticism. We spend our lives adjusting ourselves, thinking we're being a good person. It's very scary. This is the greatest regret, not doing what I really wanted. And we even hear that in an initial way. It seems selfish. Doing what I want, I should do what others want. And this is where, unless we get really clear in the earlier stages of a lam rim and know exactly what a delusion is and exactly what a virtue is, and you learn that in high school, we don't get this at all. It's too confusing because virtues and non-virtues are so caught up in us now. Attachment and love, attachment and compassion for us now are so mixed up in our minds, we can't tell the difference. And because of this massive attachment to do what other people think, is so confusing for us to distinguish between that and compassion, doing the right thing, or the wisdom, the courage to do the right thing, you know. Most people, we don't like to make trouble, you know. Some of us make trouble. I made trouble in my life. I used to think I was so clever for doing what I wanted, so my level of it was selfish. But there was a good side. There was a good side. I can see it now. I would not be doing what I'm doing. I would not have become a Buddhist nun and given up what the world thought was good, with the pressure from normal world and family, unless I'd had this. I was selfish, but I also had this kind of determination to do what I had to do. Aren't I fortunate? I had to calm the selfishness down. Still am trying to calm the selfishness down, you know, the self-cherishing, this one. But there can be a good side to this, having the courage to do, even if everyone criticizes. So, and I think in some cultures where family is very strong, this is almost impossible. You know, the strict Asian one. I think the Latino family thing is quite strong, isn't it? You know, is it not? Very strong pressure. Look at and that's what we're talking about here. Terrified to do what mummy says not to do. We think it's virtuous. And then we say, oh, I don't want to upset her. Rubbish. You're just too scared not to be, you're too scared to upset somebody because it will freak you out, because your attachment to being seen as a good person is very primordial. Do we hear? It's really painful. It's very painful. And this is why the lamas all talk about it. I mean, Lama Zopa just goes on and on and on about it. You know, this is the point. This is what our motivation is mostly now. The need to be seen as good. The need to to be praised and have a good reputation. It's hard to see it, but we can see it, but it's scary. So, of course, the aim here isn't just to go off and do what you want and be selfish. That's not the alternative. But it's to practice Dharma, which means to be motivated, and this is why the emphasis in this part of the path, which is especially in the section about, you know, transforming problems, this deeper level of ripping out delusions. That actually looks like we're being a nice person, but it's just self-cherishing. It's just being selfish. It's following the ego's desperate needs, you know. And it's very scary to get past this. So the alternative is to do, in other words, our motivation now is the 8 worldly dharmas. Our motivation is for the praise in relation to people, okay? And we are very social creatures, let's face it. Is it not? So, I mean, this is how, and in our materialist view of psychology, we are actually defined as being a social person. You'd be, if you give up the 8 worldly dharmas, the way the lamas are talking, you'd be considered autistic in our culture. Do you understand what I'm saying? You'd be considered to have, in fact, one of my sisters, it's true, one of my sisters, my family was 7 siblings, and we love each other very much. We used to fight like crazy when we were children, but we're very close, and we have this unspoken agreement that we don't talk about things that we would fight about. So we have wonderful time. We talk about the things we agree with, It's just fine. It works beautifully. We really do enjoy each other's company. And so we don't fight. And second, we don't speak about each other behind our backs. So there's really good harmony. Because you know what it's like in families, And it really does work. But the thing is, one of my sisters, Judy, who doesn't like Buddhism at all, and she's full on at the moment. She's a lawyer in Melbourne, and she's completely involved in this exposing of the Catholic Church for all the pedophilia, all the abuse of children, sexual abuse of children. So Judy, we love each other. In fact, I've been a Buddhist. Okay, I was just trying to make my point now about not talking about things we don't agree with. I never talk about Buddhism. They know perfectly well what I am. Look at me, But that we never talk about Buddhism because they don't ask me. Well, Judy took me out for a meal last year, and it was the first time in 37 years she asked me a question about what I thought. We really do communicate well. We have wonderful conversations. But then often when they talk about things and I agree with them, they think I agree with them. I'm just being harmonious, Do you understand? So Judy asked me, she said, why don't you ever talk about it? I said, Judy, you never ask me. I'm not going to talk about it. Then she asked me. It was the first time in 37 years. I was quite amazed. I didn't say too much. I talked about the mind. She wanted to understand. Anyway, the point is this. One time when she was, slightly too much drink, and they don't get drunk or anything, but, your mouth loosens a bit when you drink, don't you? And Judy decided, she said she thinks that I am borderline Asperger's. Because I don't have close relationships, I don't seem to have a home, I don't seem to, have the usual ordinary emotions of ordinary people. Well, I thought, that sounds like praise, actually, isn't it? You understand what I'm saying? Because normal person gets jealous, and normal person has to have someone to talk to and share your life with, because otherwise you'd be lonely. So all the good reasons, in my opinion, she saw them as bad, Anyway, she didn't say too much, and we didn't pursue it. It was okay. But you understand my point? So it's like we've got to see this. And I'm trying to say, just because I'm a nun, I'm so clever. Believe me, I have just as much attachment for everybody as like everyone else, but it doesn't for me in my life translate into wanting a partner and babies, that's all. But or a house. But I still like being praised, and I want to be seen as a good person. There's no question. It just doesn't translate in the usual way. But if we look at the usual way, we can see what drives that. But, look when you say your partner leaves you, and then you're looking for another partner because you're lonely. But honestly, loneliness, it's logically true, although it seems very painful to hear this. Loneliness logically is attachment to reputation, attachment to praise, meaning you haven't got it. So you feel like when you're lonely, it means all your thoughts, which are all about me and others, there's no other there. So you feel like there's no one to talk to. Therefore, you feel like you're not worthwhile. But why would my thoughts be less valuable just because someone else doesn't hear them? Why do we feel that I'm not valuable just because someone else is not there to listen to me? That's the point. The Buddha's saying we are everything already inside us. It is not relevant what people think of us. It's actually not relevant, which seems a bit shocking for us. We can't cope with this. If we're really trying to develop our qualities, then we actually need to be away from people. This is the retreat mode. This is the really best one. You need to leave sex, drugs, and rock and roll, become a monk and nun, and go to the mountains. It's the only way to really give up the delusions. Because if we're all the time around other people and adjusting ourselves, especially if we're patient, kind people, which is marvelous, but always compromising, always adjusting, not doing the thing that would be the wise thing to do, because this business is afraid to upset people. Or then if you are together in a relationship and when the person's been mean to you, why you suffer so badly, obsessed with them. Why they're not mean. You know, we go to the therapist and complain, all these things not as mean to me as this and this. All this is based on the attachment to reputation and the attachment to praise. We've got to hear it. So it's really hard to give it up in the context of partners and families. Because their voices inside our head are so big, trying to make everyone happy, what auntie thinks and what mummy thinks and daddy and the sisters and the uncles and the brothers, and our attachment also for things to be nice. This is the comfort one. This is the second one. Attachment for nice things. Attachment to feel good. And the millisecond, this is the point about attachment, the second attachment doesn't get what it wants, then we don't feel good. So this governs hugely, too, all our business with relationships, you know. You're too scared to do something that will upset the apple cart. And we think we're being virtuous. I think we're communicating, aren't we? So it's quite hard to give up. I mean, I don't have husbands and children, but I work with people. It's just the same, you know. All the time. You want to be seen as good. Desperate. You're doing something, and you're thinking of someone seeing you doing it. You're doing the dishes, and you want the person to see you're doing the dishes. Or you're in the, you know, even and all the time in our mind, we're thinking of that, you know. We're telling someone what we did. We can't wait to tell someone what we think. We call it sharing. And it is sharing, and sharing is very nice. Anyway. It's too much. It's very hard to get past it because it's so total, you know. So I don't know. What do you think? Any questions? What do you think? Does it make sense? No, that's the other extreme. That's the one of having aversion, hating people, or going away, being depressed and miserable in your own room. No, that's not the opposite. The point here is what they're saying here in particular at this level of the teachings in the Bodhisattva path is that at the moment, this craving for comfort, craving for praise, etc., this is what motivates our usual actions and which is what makes them neurotic and negative. So the opposite is to change the motivation and make it virtuous, make it compassion, make it wisdom. To change the reason. So in other words, the simple thing would be, you know, if you know you want to, I don't know, I mean, there's a million examples. If you do something good, be content with the fact that you did it. And it doesn't matter that someone saw you. It doesn't matter. Someone doesn't need to know about it. At the moment, most of what we do that's good is because we want the praise. So it doesn't mean you don't do the good thing. You try to do it for the new reason and be content with the fact that you did that good action. You gave the $100 to a poor person or something. And we yearn for someone to know we did it. To do it with a pure motivation, which means it doesn't matter if anyone sees it. Oh, yeah, of course.
Okay.
Yes, exactly.
I'm sorry.
No, please.
This was just more of a comment. There are actions in what is important is that somebody knows it. That some actions is important that somebody knows it because that's where the good is.
Give an example.
Well, right now there is a crisis in Puerto Rico.
Yes.
If you have some kind of a solution or
Yes.
some kind of idea,
Right,
it's
sure.
important to share it.
Yeah, but the reason there, so the action of doing a good thing and other people knowing is itself not the mistake. We're looking at our craving to be seen as good, which is what motivates our action. So what you're saying is virtuous. It's perfect. It's necessary to help Puerto Rico. Of course, that's completely different. So the point here is quite specific. The action of helping others, the action of being generous, the action of helping this country become a better country, that's perfect. But it's the reason we do it. And all this teaching is saying is even the good things we do these days is mostly motivated. I mean, it's what people accuse politicians of. You know, their motives aren't pure. That's all is what's being said here. Motivation to be pure instead of the impure one. That's the point here, which means see our mind.
How can we avoid getting caught up with that?
By knowing our mind.
Huh?
By knowing our mind, by being our own therapist, as Lama Zopa likes to put it, Lama Yeshe likes to put it. And this is why, you know, if you study this packaging of the teachings, this lamb rim, is it on?
Probando.
Yeah, yeah. Sit down, please. It's okay. Sit down. Please sit down. Relax. This is why, you know, when we understand, if we study the Buddha's teachings, for example, in this tradition, the Tibetan tradition, it's always emphasized this packaging of Buddha's teachings. And so I keep mentioning junior school, high school, this kind of thing. You know, this particular packaging of Buddha that's called the lamb rim, this medieval phrase, this gradual path. It's the way of presenting Buddha's teachings in an orderly way, you know, simple, the middle, then most advanced. So this level is the most advanced. So we can't do this one unless we've done the earlier stages, which means beginning to harness the crazy energy of our uncontrolled body and speech. Don't go around harming people, lying, killing, stealing. That's straightforward negativity. Calming that down, then beginning to really see attachment to the sensory objects and beginning to work with this. At this more advanced level, it's even talking about how the good things we do are motivated by attachment as well. So the beginning stages, we try to stop doing the bad things, which is motivated by attachment. But at this more advanced level, we're trying to get to see our mind, to see how attachment even is why we do good things. And that's what we're trying to change. And it's just, you can't do this properly to know. I mean, I can only say these words. I've been hearing these words myself for a long time. I have to teach about them. But every time I say them, it gets clearer and clearer. The more I see my mind, the more I can see how powerful this is. But it's taken me a time to see it, you know. It's not obvious. It just takes time. So really a way to say it is to give up doing something good because you'll be seen as a good person. Do the good thing, but for the right reason. That's when it's a really pure action for oneself, one's own advantage, you know. Keep it, yeah. Let him have it. He'll pass it to the next person when we finished our conversation. Yes, go on. Sit down, relax.
I think it's very important to try to teach that to children, no?
Absolutely. Oh, my God.
Because that's when you begin.
No, that's exactly. I swear to you, if we don't get it as children, then it's much harder. Of course it is. Because we can see with children, the ones who are really needy for praise, and then how we manipulate and cheat and go behind. Oh, it's true. It's so huge. It's so huge. You're absolutely right. It needs great courage to do this. It needs a lot of, you know, courage, certainty. And that means knowing our minds, and that's not easy. We don't know our minds. We don't have these techniques in our world. We only see the external event, you know, we don't see the inside.
Is there I will not call it a manual, but some book, Buddhist book that teaches how to teach children?
I think, well, you know, I think there are many things out. I don't know that many. I know that people are doing them more and more. There are, yes. Okay. But the key to success has to be that I'm doing it. I can't teach children if I don't know it. You know, isn't it? Thank you. There. Who else? Huh? I need a conversation.
On the ones that you were giving examples of attachment, when, for example, with your mother or maybe with your relatives that you're trying to, you know, do everything, how can you detach yourself from that one?
That's the job. Observing that, you know, the aim isn't to be mean to your mother. The aim isn't to be unkind and just go and be selfish and do what you like. That's not the aim. But the aim is if you do know what is the right thing to do. Okay, it could be to go, you want to go away for 1 month to do a retreat. Okay. And even, you know, you could say, Even a simple example, like say you are working on your mind and you're trying to be a Buddhist, and that's helping you do your job better as a mother and a daughter or whatever you like, then you really know for you at this point it's the best thing for you for the long-term benefit for everybody. And then you make the decision to do that. Even if your parents and the people say you're a bad mother leaving your children for 1 month, it looks like you're being selfish. But if your reason is pure and you know it's beneficial, you are confident, then you have the courage to make that decision even though people criticize you. This is hard, but this has to come from some certainty of what is the right thing to do. And this takes courage. It takes courage. Are you seeing what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I mean, the trouble is, when we are governed very strongly by attachment to what our family think, and it's been all our life like this, and then also because you are a nice person, we then assume it's good. We don't realize there's so much fear there, and in the end it's stopping us from doing what's really beneficial. It's very hard. It's very hard. It doesn't, because the point is also, you see, okay, just talking about attachment in general, okay? This state of mind is so deep inside us. It's got multi faces, And attachment, okay, in this Buddhist model of the mind, like I said, in the mental consciousness, we've got positive states of mind, and we know the words, love, compassion, generosity, forgiveness, all these words. We know them immediately. They're the good ones. And remember, Buddha says they are at the core of our being, and we can grow them to incredible degrees. Then we have this other set. He calls them simply, you read the words, mental affliction, negative state of mind, delusion, all these words for these neuroses. He would have liked the word, I think, Buddha, neurotic, So these ones, which we think in our world are completely normal. We would say anger is normal, jealousy is normal, wanting to not upset your mother is normal. We'd say like this. So we don't really question them unless they're very strong. But the Buddha, he's far more radical in his view of the mind. And he is saying having any attachment, any neediness, any emotional fears, any jealousy, any anger, he says having any of it, you're mentally ill. It's another phrase Buddha would have liked. We are mentally ill. This is his point. He's been quite radical in his understanding of the mind. And he says that these states of mind cause all the problems, and in fact, we can get rid of them. This is what nirvana means, ridding the mind of all of this. So, okay. So then the energy of these delusions is we need to understand very well. This is why we need to study the Buddhist model of the mind, Buddhist psychology in reasonable depth. Otherwise, we'll never understand. We can all say the word attachment, but unless we clearly understand what it is, according to the Buddha's view, not our view in the world, then we'll always be confused. You see, for example, we use the word attachment to mean the same as being close to somebody. Oh, I'm very attached to my children. The world would say that, and that sounds like you love them. That's great. But we don't have the same definition as Buddha does, and that's so important to be super clear what he means by this attachment. The Buddha says in general, all the neuroses, all the neurotic states of mind have this particular function of over-exaggerating certain characteristics of the object. It's the deepest delusion in our mind in day-to-day life. It runs everything. It drives us like a motor, So attachment, for example, to chocolate cake means it will look far more delicious than it really is. Then the next level of attachment is it makes you crave it, and then it causes you to believe that when you get it, it'll make you happy. And then there's all the expectation of the happiness. And, it's got these many levels in relation to people, objects, your own body, and indeed the one here we're talking to be seen by others in this way. It's an over-exaggeration. Okay, so we need to understand that that's what attachment means. So attachment, in this book, I'm working on a book at the moment of Lama Zopa Rinpoche about how to help people at the time of death. And he's got a whole section there on the suffering of attachment and how that is the worst suffering at the time of death. Attachment to our body, attachment to our reputation, attachment to family, attachment to our things. It causes unbelievable fear at the time of death if we haven't worked on it, if we haven't seen it and lessened it in our daily life. It causes the death to be like a nightmare. It's attachment, So the point about attachment it's constantly there. It's really subtle, and it's like this. It's like as if it's this junkie part of us every second, this craving. It's desperate to have only the nice things. It's got to have everything nice. And this is in relation to the family business. Attachment is, in our minds, is frantic to be everything to be nice. It can't stand when things go wrong. Now, what's fascinating in Buddhist psychology, the minute attachment doesn't get what it wants, and that's about 1,000 times a day, you drop something and you get upset. Well, upset, okay. One Lama said, and it's so perfect, the response when attachment doesn't get what it wants, that's called anger. It mightn't be loud anger. We have all these polite words: frustrated, annoyed, irritated, upset. They're all variations of mild anger. And this is the point. The millisecond attachment doesn't get what it wants, annoyance, upset, irritation, and depending on how strong it is for you, huge rage. But look, also, another point in Buddhist psychology is most fascinating. They don't talk about fear as being a particular delusion. We almost think they miss it, But the point is this. In Buddhist psychology, the point is this, that all the delusions are rooted in fear. Now, you look at a person who gets angry, which means that their attachment didn't get what it wanted. You look at a person who's got really strong anger. They're shouting. Their eyes are wide. Spit coming out the mouth. Tears coming. Irrational, crazy words coming out of their mouth. You understand? Well, really, you could say they're having a mental breakdown. But we just go, oh, well, he's just angry, He'll get over it. But that's serious. It's a serious mental problem. Look at it. But we just think it's normal. The reason a person is so freaking out is because this huge craving inside them to get what I want every second. That's what attachment is. It's frantic to get what I want every second. It is desperate to get what I want every second. And it only wants the nice things. It's got to have the nice things. It's frantic to have ugly things. It can't cope with anything that the attachment can't bear. And that's a huge part with the family. You have an alcoholic brother. Everyone talks about him behind his back. We're all trying to solve his problem. We all go blah, blah. We get upset with him. We get angry. And the mummy says this and daddy says this. Everybody's going on about him. I mean, back off and leave him alone, please. Look at your own mind. We can't stand when things go wrong. So then we try to make it nice. This is why we go crazy. And why we go crazy when things aren't nice is because attachment can't stand it. Are you kind of seeing what I'm saying? Attachment is this junkie that only wants the nice things. That's why we can't stand seeing suffering out there. It distresses us too much. So attachment's huge. Don't think it's some simple little state of mind. It's desperate for everything to be nice. So then if we have masses of attachment for reputation and what people think and to make everything nice in the family, and that means we have a lot of fear to upset things. We can't stand the thought that mummy will criticize me or he will think this or the auntie will think that. We can't stand it. In other words, attachment has no courage. It just wants to be made nice, stroked, It's like an infant. That's attachment. So you've got to be so brave to, in the face of when attachment doesn't get what it wants, to be brave in accepting it. As Buddha says, if you can change something, please change it. But if you can't, why worry? It sounds so shocking. So this is a huge level of practice, Having courage in confronting the things that attachment doesn't want. Like the problems, the dramas, mummy being upset, mummy manipulating us to do what she wants because basically it's her attachment. And we are afraid to upset her. We don't want to upset her. We call it being kind to mummy. You're not being kind. You're giving into her attachment. You're allowing your own attachment. You're allowing yourself to be manipulated. And that's why we blame other people. We blame them because we think it's their fault for bullying me. Well, excuse me, it's your fault for not having the courage to do what you think is right. Don't ever blame other people. This is the trouble with attachment. It gives us we think the other person is all the fault. It's very tricky, Are we communicating? Okay. So to really see this attachment like this, And it's only when we get to these more advanced levels in the Bodhisattva path that we see them so subtle, so primordial, constantly there, nagging at us, you know. So the aim here is to do the right thing, to do what is moral, good, kind, compassionate, wise, but for the right reason, not for the wrong reason, for the right reason. And that means making the tough choices. You know, you really know it's best that you give up your husband, give up your children, and become a nun. I'll give an example. I'm not saying you should be a nun. Please don't mistake my point here. I'm not trying to make you be a nun. Don't get my point. But, you know, many people do that. They really realize it's time to leave that relationship because it's better to do this other thing. Everyone turns against them, but they know it's the right thing. That's really courageous. That takes courage, you know. And many people live in their relationships, and it's a garbage dump relationship. You're angry with each other, you don't like each other, you don't communicate, you're resentful, you're bitter, but you're scared of change. You're scared of upsetting things. That's attachment. I'm sorry. Because we can't stand the things being different. We can't. You understand? It doesn't mean we have to make tough choices. Maybe your life doesn't need you to make tough choices. But it might, when you do it for the right reason, you make the tough choice. You know. But you have to know your mind. You have to hear it. You have to hear it, you know. Because the first thing we'd say, let's say you're a Buddhist and you think it's important to do this retreat with the Dalai Lama. Let's just say. But you know very well, you just think of it, you freak out. Because, you know, mum will be freaking out, the kids will be the husband will panic. It just seems too impossible to have to confront all that. It's just, and that's attachment to reputation. That's attachment to, you know, comfort. It's tough. To make tough choices is not easy. But if it's the long-term benefit, His Holiness the Dalai Lama always says, always aspire to do what is most beneficial. And if you can, long-term better than short-term. And all you can say is attachment is totally not even short-term benefit. It's totally just junky for now. Junky for easy, good feeling. Junky for everything to be easy. Unable to bear problems. And this is why this is such a powerful way they talk about transforming problems into happiness. This is another way of discussing this one. That seeing it as seeing when generally a day-to-day approach to this, a day-to-day approach also, is learning to be glad when attachment doesn't get what it wants. That means at the level of the comfort thing or not getting something, but the comfort one especially. I mean, it's so easy in our world these days, in the modern world, to get what you want pretty quickly. The temperature, the coffee, exactly as you want things. We can do it easily. So the moment we don't get what we want, we get upset. That attachment gets upset. So this is why the simple level of giving up attachment to comfort is the second, you know, you're too hot, or the second you're too cold, or the second the food doesn't taste right, or the moment when I go to Starbucks and I want my coffee to be 180 degrees exactly, whatever that is in, you understand, with exactly 2 shots of something with full milk and the honey all the right way. And if I don't get it, the mind gets upset. This is the one of comfort. This is the one of comfort, you know, that's that attachment. And that, again, is huge in our world. Forget the deeper ones of praise and reputation. Comfort. Feeling good. Feeling good. So the one of transforming problems, it seems counterintuitive. Actually practicing feeling good when you don't get the coffee the way you want it. When the person is mean to you. The opposite, you know. We're trying to train our minds in being brave to think the opposite is good. And why is the opposite good? Why is it good to not get what attachment wants? Because it's the quickest way to quit attachment, to purify attachment, to give up attachment. Every time attachment gets what it wants, which we think is happiness, Buddha says we're just deepening our suffering because it's a junkie. It's a junkie. So every time attachment doesn't get what it wants, you try to think that's good. This is the simplest level of going against these 8 worldly dharmas, you know. Especially the comfort one. Every second, that one's running us. You know, I get sciatica sometimes, and the second I feel it, the mind is distressed. The second I feel it, even mild, the mind gets distressed, doesn't it? You don't want it. You want to make it go away. The second you have the smallest discomfort. This is the attachment to comfort. And it seems so normal. People would think you're peculiar to enjoy your sciatica. You understand? I think you must be mentally ill, you know. But the point is to look at how instinctive it is. This is the one that's pretty instinctive, frantic, to feel comfortable. Oh, my God. And, of course, the assumption that when you're not comfortable, that's what unhappiness is. But what we don't realize, that the unhappiness has got nothing to do with your body, it's to do with your mind. It's to do with aversion. So the subtler level, the most fundamental level of anger is the word aversion. Attachment, aversion. They're the direct opposite. Attachment, aversion. You know, a strong level of attachment is craving. A strong level of aversion is anger. We understand. So these two are running all the time, frantic. And this is what's beneath the 8 worldly dharmas. We're constantly craving to get the nice thing, the comfort. You know, for example, the comfort, the feel good. The millisecond it doesn't, it's unhappy. And then our mind gets distressed. And then we like, for example, you're tired. We can't stand being tired. We feel we get stressed because we're tired. Well, I'm sorry. When you're in love with somebody, when you were younger, you'd spend all night talking, all night drinking at parties, and you go to work next day blissed out, exhausted. Is it not true? I remember, completely, you're exhausted, but you're so blissed out because attachment was happy, you know. So it's not true that being tired makes you unhappy. We have to see this distinction. We have to see the difference. It's not the body, it's the mind. This is really a powerful one, this. This is the comfort one. It is not your body that makes you stressed. It's your mind. It's aversion. And what stress is when attachment doesn't get what it wants and it builds up. That's all stress is, you know. Sorry to make you whatever. You understand my point? You see what I'm saying? So we have to see the difference between the physical experience and the mind interpreting it. Because this is another way of talking about Buddhist psychology. The mind is running all the time with its interpretations. Everything in our head, all these thousands of thoughts every day, are simply interpretations. They're interpretations of a certain event. You have a pain in your knee, and so attachment wants no pain. So aversion interprets it as bad. Therefore, you say you're suffering. It's just not logical. I know it sounds peculiar, but it's not logical. Or why are you unhappy, Robina? Well, you know, Veronica insulted me. We go mad when people insult us, don't we? We go crazy if a person at work doesn't like you. We think that, and that they say that's the reason you're mentally ill, you're so distressed. No, it's because attachment didn't get what it wants. This is the reason. Got to be so logical, you know. And delusions are not logical. They're completely neurotic, manipulative. But we have to hear them. We have to be reasonable with ourselves and logical, not buy into ego's ridiculous stories, you know. Do you understand? Really and truly, this is the job of being your own therapist, and it's very tough. But this means you have to be clear about what a delusion is and what its characteristics are and how it functions, and what a virtuous state of mind is and how it functions. And this is the point that Buddha's making. We can change our mind. Because mind, this is what sounds so hilarious, mind is thoughts. Everything happening in our mind, including all the emotions, they're all based on thoughts. They all come down to being thoughts. And we can change our thoughts. We can change our thoughts. And this is the business of transforming problems, which is related to this one of the 8 worldly dharmas, which is this more advanced level of seeing your mind. It's also based in emptiness. You know, like recently, for many years, I worked with people in prison. I gave up running it a few years ago, but I still know many of my friends in prison. And there's one fellow, Mitch, in Kentucky, on death row there. I've known him for 20 years, 18 years or something. And I saw him recently, and he's getting close to his death date, okay? So he's sitting there in his red jumpsuit, no possessions, lousy food. His company is 40 other crazy guys on death row, you know, that's his home. He's a Buddhist, he does his practice. He won't get out alive, he has one little room for his house, but he's a happy human being. He's completely come to terms with what happened. He used to be involved in dealing drugs. He wasn't some psycho, you know. He's dealing in drugs. When you have drugs, you have guns. When you have guns, people die. What to do? 3 people died in a shootout. him and his friend. His friend is also on death row, and he's a Catholic now. And they're really close friends, and they're friends of mine. And they're just, this fellow, Mitch, came to terms with all his suffering, accepted his responsibility, completely purified, has transformed his life. And he's truly now a genuinely happy person. We sit in the chapel for a couple of hours in the prison, and we just laugh hysterically the whole time, you know, because he's just so funny and wonderful. Living in his little red jumpsuit, waiting for his death date. He said, I'm ready for that electric jolt, Robina, you know. He's amazing. And so we checked up that he actually has a really fortunate life. He feels fortunate. Why? He doesn't have to work. The taxpayers pay for him. He gets his food 3 meals a day, although it's disgusting food. He gets his food provided. He spends his day doing his meditation, doing his jogging. He makes this little thing for his grandchildren, makes that for his mummy, and does this for his daddy. He spends all his day studying his Dharma, doing his meditation, and helping others. He's got a very fortunate life. He realizes he's got a really fortunate life. He doesn't have to work. And he really means it sincerely. He's extremely content. So, okay, now, conventionally speaking, if you heard a person is on death row, you'd feel very sorry for him. The person's suffering, you think. That's called suffering, right? Definitely called suffering. And the point Buddha's making is this, and this is the point about transforming problems, being based on emptiness. If it's true that a prison, death row, is in its own nature negative, then he could never possibly ever be happy. It's impossible. If it were true that it's inherently bad to be on death row, then he could never be happy. That proves it's empty. It proves that being on death row is a dependent arising like everything else. That means he can change his mind about it. And that's the point about transforming problems. It's based on the view of emptiness. That this assumption we have of what is good and bad are based on attachment's views. They're the philosophy of attachment. And that they don't have a sound basis in logic, Buddha's saying. So changing our mind is the key. I mean, you'd think punch someone in the nose, relatively speaking, you'd call that a negative action, wouldn't you? Conventionally speaking, that is considered a negative action. Buddha, remember, says a negative action is one that harms another. Well, normally speaking, punch in the nose sounds like you just harmed somebody. Well, I did Kung Fu. I got punched in the nose all the time. I didn't mind. I didn't feel bad. I was even taught to apologize to you if you punched me in the nose, because I didn't get out of the way soon enough. So in Kung Fu, punching is not bad. So if punching in the nose is an innately negative action, I would have to be suffering. I would have to be angry. I would have to be distressed. This is the proof that it's empty, and which is the proof we can change our mind. This is the point. This is the point. We can transform problems into happiness. And the simple solution is change the way you interpret it. This is all we're saying here. Attachment is an interpretation. Anger is an interpretation. But it's very hard to see this because we believe 1,000,000% in the philosophy of attachment and aversion. And we use it to back up our stories, all our actions. We use it to blame others. We use it to get guilt. It's just really awful. And this is why to work on our minds is so difficult. And this is really putting into practice Buddhist psychology, you know. But it's tough. It's hard. So again, in Buddha's model of the mind, the mental consciousness that we have. Okay, first of all, it's so fascinating when you study Buddhist psychology in more depth, and I don't know what you've studied here, but I'm sure you've studied these things. You know, you learn, first of all, that we have sensory consciousness, which is, so okay, remember the word consciousness and the word mind in general in Buddhism are used synonymously. They're referring to our non-physical. It's non-physical, it's not your brain, doesn't come from mummy, doesn't come from daddy, doesn't come from God, but is a continuity of mental moments that you can track back and back and back before this birth and on and on and on after this birth. This is a fundamental given in Buddhist psychology. Okay, one has to study it and think about it, but this is what Buddha's saying. Okay, so this consciousness of ours is not physical. One way of describing it when you study Buddhist psychology is you've got sensory consciousness and you have mental consciousness. And there's a huge, clear distinction here. And it's fairly evident as soon as we hear this. So, you know, for example, I will say, let me drink the contents first. I might say, oh, look at that pretty cup, I would say that. Oh, it's kind of pleasant, the flower, the red and everything. Your eye goes to it, So we would say normally, oh, look at that pretty cup. Now, Veronica might go, oh, that's a disgusting cup. Let's say, for example, we know that. So we assume, don't we? She assumes when her attachment, which is default, instantly she looks at this because it doesn't suit her attachment's view of what's pretty. Basically, that's the basis. So that millisecond, it doesn't fit her needs. It will appear to her eyes as ugly. My mind, it will appear beautiful. Well, both of these stories are nonsense. Because you see, eye consciousness, ear consciousness, tongue consciousness, touch consciousness, nose consciousness are very, very limited levels of our capacity for cognition. Cognition is the function of mind, to cognize, to know, to be aware. This is the job of our mind. And Buddha's long-term view, this is the point in Buddhism, that mind has the capacity to cognize that which is true, to cognize that which exists. And this is a fundamental point here. That the problem now is in our minds, in our mental consciousness, we have all these states of mind, the delusions, the neuroses, the afflictive emotions, that are liars, that are cognizing things that don't exist. They embellish. So, okay, that's the mental consciousness, but just a second. The sensory consciousness is very limited. All it can cognize is shape and color. That's it. It's not capable of knowing anything more. It's a really limited capacity. But because our mental consciousness and our sensory consciousness have been working hand in hand, Buddha says, for countless lives, then within a millisecond, quicker than, the Olympics, quicker than those stopwatches that do about 1,000th of a minute, quicker than Google even, and I really mean this sincerely, quicker than Google, your eye consciousness sees this, it triggers your mental consciousness, where all the stories are stored, where the workshop is, as Lama Zopa says, where all your memories are, where all the labels are, where your memory of having seen this color before, of knowing it's a cup, knowing what pretty is. There's millions of different opinions all stored away in my mental consciousness. They are triggered instantaneously, and out comes the sentence, there is a pretty cup. Your eye consciousness is not seeing a pretty cup. Hers is not seeing an ugly cup. We both simply cognize shape and color, and then all the rest of it are stories in our mental consciousness that we have made up. This is what Buddha's saying. So it's very sobering, Our mental consciousness, we make up all the time. And so in this mental consciousness of ours, we've got, as I said before, 3 categories of states of mind. There's no 4th category. There are millions of states of mind. They're either one that is negative, neurotic, delusional, exaggerating, distorted, based in fear, the voice of ego. There's one that's virtuous, which is relatively reasonable, harmonious, appropriate, beneficial. And then there are lots and lots and lots of others that are neither of these, but which are still necessary. They call them neutral, but that doesn't mean they're not important. So, for example, we've got the capacity for concentration, haven't we? We've got a state of mind called discrimination. We've got a state of mind called mindfulness. There's many of these. I like to call them the mechanics of our mind. Without these functioning properly, we couldn't have any experiences. They're really crucial, but they don't have a characteristic of being virtuous or non-virtuous. There's a really important distinction. So this is the contents of our mental consciousness, okay? So at the gross level, we live in these. We live in these. We don't touch any subtler level. The Buddha says in the long term, we need to access more subtle levels of our mental consciousness, which we don't even posit as existing in our materialist views of the mind. So at this gross level that we function at, all these opinions, these thousands of different voices, roommates I like to call them, all these, the negative roommates, there's a million different versions of anger, a million different versions of attachment, of jealousy, of pride. They're all working together hand in hand, Then there's love, compassion, kindness. But the trouble is the negative ones seem to me to be running the show, They're the roommates we can hear mostly. Attachment, jealousy, not fair, poor me, upset, fearful, anxious, worried what people think, don't want to upset people. All these unhappy thoughts, depression. which we really believe are who we really are. Then we've got some kindness and goodness and love and compassion. We have these, but they're sort of hiding under the bed, these roommates. They don't seem to have much say sometimes. The negative ones seem to me to be really shouting mostly. Are we communicating with that vision? I use that for my own mind. Does that make sense to you? Or is it peculiar? Huh? Are you hearing what I'm saying? All the roommates? Okay. We've got to know all the roommates. So the point is, what I'm getting at here is, the delusions the Buddha says, remember, they are adventitious. We don't need them, and eventually we can rid our mind of them utterly. That's when you achieve your nirvana. You've ceased the neuroses, and they are the cause of suffering. And they're rooted in the root delusion, the root mother of them all delusion, the main delusion called, in English, ignorance. In Tibetan, ma rigpa. This primordial misconception, primordial delusion, this huge instinctive sense of a self that's separate, lonely, bereft, empty, nothing, miserable, concrete, and based in fear. Its main voice is attachment to get what it wants. And then when it doesn't, that's what anger is. And then jealousy and all the other variations come, you know. These are the ones that in our world we think are normal. But for the Buddha says these are mental illnesses and we do not need them. And the job of being a Buddhist is ridding your mind of this lot and growing the goodness, growing the virtues, growing compassion and love and all the others, which are, you know, relatively speaking, reasonable states of mind. So to do this job properly, in the long term, we need to access these more subtle, more refined levels of our mind that we in our world don't even posit as existing. You know, and this was where we have to use these techniques which actually the Hindus created. It was the Indians 3,000 years ago, Dalai Lama said recently in a book I read, that it was the Indians more than 3,000 years ago who started this amazing conversation about self, the nature of self, which is what Buddha certainly took from there and carried on in his own style. And indeed, look at all the Westerners, Jung, Freud, all these people this last 150 years, trying to work out what the nature of a self is, what they're trying to deal with in science, you know, in all these things. This is this amazing conversation. And so this technique called concentration meditation, mindfulness meditation, often called that now, is this amazing psychological technique that we can all learn. In the long term, Buddha says we must accomplish, that enables us to go beyond the gross level of all the opinions, all the chatting, all the thoughts, all the dramas, all the stories, all the assessments, many of which do not have a basis in reality. That's what Buddha's saying, and this is why we suffer, you know. So in order to unpack all this and unpack it and deconstruct it and fundamentally reconstruct our mind to be in sync with reality, we need to get to subtle levels. We must, Buddha says. In the long term, we must get single point of concentration. And we don't even posit that as existing in our culture. If you were to see a person who'd accomplished this, they would look like they were dead. Their mind has gone way beyond the conceptual level, way beyond the brain level, but at a really refined level that's super capable of unpacking and unraveling this crazy, insane asylum here, you know, in our own mind. And that's our job, to sort out this big mess of these thousands of voices a second. Or we can't tell the difference. They're like a big soup, you know. We have to learn to distinguish between the neurotic ones and the virtuous ones. And this is the main point that Buddha makes. And if we don't know Buddhist psychology, how can we do this? How can we possibly understand attachment? And then indeed, you know, your point, how can we help children do this if we can't help ourselves? Because Buddhist psychology is really unique. I'm not trying to say it's better or worse. You can decide who you follow, you know. But the Buddha's view is very specific, very precise, very clear. And this is what's fascinating at this level we all function at right now. What we call emotions is only when it hits our body. We don't notice we feel anything until our body feels it, you know. And we think that's more profound than thoughts. But it's almost like the opposite for the Buddha. We are so gross, the trouble is, that we don't notice things until we feel it in our body. You know, in my life, I didn't, because I wasn't taught introspective techniques. My mother didn't have any. She didn't know. But the only time I knew I was angry when my mouth, the words were vomiting out, and I was shouting and yelling, you know. Someone else in this room maybe only realizes they're depressed when they can't get out of bed one morning. Well, it's kind of, we notice too late. We notice only when the body can't move or the body is vomiting, you know. But this is a gross level, a very gross level. So all these emotions, as we call them, the more we get this focus and get concentration and go into our minds, the more we understand Buddha's model of the mind, the more we can be this super discriminating and can begin to observe the thought process, the elaborate conceptual construction, which is informing that emotion. In other words, when you get to see that raging anger is actually an elaborate set of opinions about that thing that your mind has made up. This is quite shocking to us. Even right now, I don't think, you know, when we see delicious cake, we don't think our mind is making it that. We think it is that. We don't realize, as Lama Zopa says, most of the time in ordinary life, we don't even realize that our mind is playing any role at all. We think like this innocent victim that got plonked on this earth by mummy or daddy or God or somebody, and I've had nothing to do with it. It's not my fault, is it? Hey. And then things happen to me. This is the irony of ego. We feel like this victim. But the Buddha says it's completely opposite. We brought with us, fully programmed from the first second of conception, all our own neuroses, all our own goodness, all our own whatever it might be. It's our qualities. Do not come from mummy. They do not come from daddy. They don't come from creator, and they don't come from the external. As Lama Zopa says, when you've really seen the true nature of chocolate cake, when you've realized the emptiness of chocolate cake, when you've really understood how chocolate cake does exist, when we've really realized that the way chocolate cake appears to us is in the aspect of what's in our mind, when we've really realized this all the way to emptiness, as Lama Zopa says, it's as if there is no chocolate cake. But there is. But what does exist is so subtle, it's as if it's an illusion. And this is a really fine point, not just being clever, you know. So, in other words, everything, the way it appears to us, is our own projection, our own junk, dumping it on top. And we really believe, and that's the materialist view personified, we really do believe it is that out there. As I see it, it is that. And no one's going to change our mind. This is how the Buddha says, how the mind works, and this is what causes us suffering. The mind for the Buddha is everything. Everything comes from the mind. Even the word karma, which is the real meaning of the word karma, is the word intention. Intention, action, intention, mental action. That's what runs everything. Everything starts from there, you know. The process of karma is just the mind thinking all these things, doing all these things, and then that's what informs our body and speech, and then that leaves imprints or programming in our mind that will produce its own experiences further down in that mind. So we are literally our own creators, Buddha says, by our minds. And this is, karma is done by minds. So we need to know our minds. We need to learn the model of the mind. What is negative? What is positive? What are the characteristics? How do they function? And then through meditation and being our own therapist every day, we see our own mind deeper and deeper and deeper. And there's attachment at these subtler levels, you know. And then having the courage to welcome when attachment doesn't get what it wants. It's the quickest way to put an atomic bomb under attachment and to become fearless, you know. We're driven by fear right now. We're driven by fear. Attachment, all the delusions, they're like junkies. They're like based in fear, actually, based in fear. And because we're frantic to have everything nice, we'll make it go away, push it away, live in denial, blame, do anything, but not deal with it, you know. So it's a tough job, but it's the only job worthwhile. Whether you want to become a multimillionaire, whether you want to have 10 children, whether you want to become a monk, there's no difference. Job is the same. This job, same one. Change your mind. Give up attachment. Give up fear. See reality as it is. As Lama Zopa says, when you've realized emptiness, there is no fear. And that's the final job to be done, based upon all this other work. You know, get to that one. Rip out the fundamental delusion, then there is no fear, he says. Tara, this term Tara, she's called liberator. And she's often referred to as the liberator from the fears of samsara. Fears of samsara sounds like a quite cute term. That's what we call living in ordinary neurosis, you know. Living in samsara means living in these neuroses. Samsara is not some place. It's your own mind, your own delusions, your own neuroses, which produce your own fear and your own suffering. All these misinterpretations of the world. That's what it is. So we've got to be brave. We've tried everything else, so might as well try this one. What's the time? Time to go home? Or what time do you finish? 9 o'clock? 8:30? What time do you finish? 9. Oh, I've said so much already. Come on. Where? Oh, good. Okay, go, talk. Your turn now. Where? Where's the hand?
Oh, I had a question. Okay,
question. Darling, talk to me.
Okay, on your response to her about family and...
Yeah.
There's a fine line, and I'm confused between compassion,
that's
being
right.
compassionate,
of course there is.
and giving into,
yes,
in my case, to my mother.
That's right. Of course there is, darling.
Obsessive.
This is why, just before you say something, His Holiness often says, compassion is not enough. We need wisdom. So it's the wisdom piece that we're missing. Because I'm not saying there's not compassion to be kind to our mother. That's incredible. That's humility. But when it's wisdom that informs it, that's when it could be the tough choice that we would make. So it's the wisdom to know when it's the right thing. That's what's difficult. But anyway, go on. Is that
No, that's what
hope that's your point, yeah.
That's
the
not
tough
my
part,
point.
to know what is the right, not just to be, I'm going to do what I want because, you know, I don't care. That's not the solution. It's having the wisdom to know what the right thing to do is, and that's what takes courage. And and wisdom is what you get when you lessen attachment. Wisdom's opposite to attachment. If we only follow attachment and fears and worries, which might look like everything's okay, but that's not following wisdom. Wisdom, as we lessen attachment and lessen fears and lessen jealousy and lessen anger and lessen the worry about what people think, which is attachment, that's when we'll make the right choices. That just takes time. Okay. We make mistakes, it's okay. Do you understand what I'm saying then?
Yeah.
That's wisdom. That's right.
Thank
Because
you.
it's very, you know, I mean, yeah, to sacrifice your life for someone else is the most remarkable level of compassion. But often when people do it, it's not it is compassion, but it's resentful, they're angry, they're frustrated, they feel guilty, and that's because of attachment. That's the difference.
That's what happened to me. I feel guilty
That's right.
or
That's exactly
or
right.
resentful.
That's exactly, and that's the one. That's it. When it's genuine compassion, which is really hard, there would not be resentment. There would be totally doing it truly for the sake of the other. Your old grandma, your old grandpa, your ugly old auntie, you know. That's amazing compassion. For most of us, there is compassion there, but it's the resentful, the unhappy, the hurt, the guilt, all that's there. And so the thing is, we can still continue to be kind to mummy, continue to be kind to the old grandpa, but stop being resentful. Learn to truly do it, even for that 10 minutes, to truly do it with a happy mind. That's a marvelous practice. And sometimes for some people, it might be the right choice to stop going to see the ugly old grandma because, you know, their mind, they can't cope with it. That's what wisdom would be, even though people will criticize because you're not being kind. But that's where they're at. They might need to say, I can't do it, even if people get upset. That's when it's quite courageous. So it's difficult. Whatever way we look at it, it's difficult. But this is the job, to know our minds well and to know the difference between the neuroses and the virtues. Do you understand? And that just takes time. It just takes time. And this is why, you know, I mean, all this tradition, which is based on the Bodhicitta teachings and all these lamas talking, they talk about, you know, okay, even as I said, His Holiness said, always aspire to do what is most beneficial, which is a huge concept. So our first thought when we hear that is, but I don't know what's most beneficial, isn't it? We don't know what's most beneficial. But this is the point here. If we do a bit of practice in the morning, you know, let's say, that one of the prayers or aspirations we really should have is you say, may I do what is most beneficial. So you don't have to know what it is, but my point is this. Because the Buddha says every thought we have sows a seed, that's the meaning of karma. So just having the thought, may I do what's most beneficial, what you're doing is you're training your mind for when the time comes, you will make the right decision. It's like you're programming yourself. with the wish to do what's right. And that somehow encourages your mind. At the time it's right, you will do it. Because we don't know what the answer is, you know. Just lead your life every day. And we want to do what's most beneficial. This is a huge aspiration. That's really what bodhicitta is. Have this as a wish every day. It's not just wishful thinking. It's genuinely serious. It will help our mind make the choices when the time is right. Definitely. Do you understand?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
I think you already answered my second question, but anyway, I'm gonna ask you. The first question was, from the point of view of Buddhism, what is forgiveness?
Okay.
And the second question was, what would be the same point of view when you feel strongly convinced that you should get away from certain people because you feel harmed, you feel not harm in the way of the attachment that you're speaking of, but a really strong conviction after working it out a long time, and you feel that you have to get away from those people and just choose with who you want to have certain kind of relationships.
Yep. That's perfect. So the first point, well, the second one first. This is really necessary. I mean, this is really common sense to make this decision about things. And that does take courage, you know, because it's all, okay, if you were at the level, let's say we were at the level of being a bodhisattva, highly advanced, doing all this work, given up attachment, given up ego, realized emptiness, huge compassion. I say we've really cultivated that. Then that person's qualified to hang around with everybody and be completely untouched by it because they're so powerful. So we have to know our level. It's like anything. If you're playing tennis, you wouldn't keep playing with the people more advanced. You'd never learn anything. I mean, it'd be too much for you. You've got to know where you're at in what you can cope with. If you're an alcoholic, for example, nobody expects you to hang around with alcoholics. It's obvious you wouldn't do it. You see my point? You've got to be. It's not because you think they're horrible people, because it's too much for your mind. You couldn't cope. So we have to know what is right for us. And the general point here, you know, the mind is the point, but the conditions that we choose to live in, depending, you know, the conditions would be, if you're trying to give up alcohol, the conditions you do not need is other alcoholics. So you remove yourself from that condition. And if we understood the important role of conditions, we'd be very intelligent. I mean, this is it's not meant to be a feminist position, but I don't know if you've read recently. I read in the different, so many surveys, research in the world, come up with a number of about 40% of women who are murdered on earth. Guess who murders them? Their attachment object. So it sort of points out attachment, doesn't it? You understand what I'm saying? It's not because you love a person that you kill somebody. It's because the poor guy is overwhelmed by grief, by rage, by hurt, by jealousy, by anger, which are the responses when attachment doesn't get what it wants. Now, I'm not trying to make a joke here, but to me it's very serious. Mm-hmm. You know, that we live in these little houses, because we're all poor, with one bedroom and one bed, and you wonder why you have problems. Are you sort of seeing my point? It's asking too much of somebody. You know, there's one of these prisons, all the prisons, a lot of the prisons, it's everywhere now, but I know when I was first dealing with the prisoners in the 90s, and there's this one type of prison in California, which is common in all the states, and I'm sure it's in every country. It's what they call permanent lockdown, where two men in a small cell, about the size of that bathroom, maybe slightly bigger, with no windows. Please imagine this, 23 hours a day. I think your most beloved, you would murder them. They kill each other all the time. I mean, who's surprised, for God's sake? You put yourself, who's got delusions, with another person who's got delusions in a small environment. No wonder 40% of people get murdered by them. It's obvious. So it is common sense and intelligence that you work out who the hell you should spend your life with and get the hell out of the way if you can't handle your mother or can't handle your crazy auntie. I don't care who it is. But you've got to know what is right for your mind. But this is what our problems are. We don't realize when you're in the same little house with the same person, and the rage and the anger, the hurt, the resentment, the jealousy, it's in your face every day. I mean, we're stupid. So kind of get the hell out, please. Leave. It's in common sense, but much of the time it's our fear that prevents us. I mean, the fact that people go back to this, I mean, even recently hearing about, this is common. In Miami recently, a friend of mine, she said, the husband of this friend, she was saying, this other friend of mine, he's completely dominated by his wife, she's jealous the whole time. I say, come on my boat with me, and he says, I've got to ask my wife first, and he feels sorry for this guy. And I said, how long have they been together? And he said, 17 years. I said, excuse me, I don't feel sorry for him. He's chosen to live with this same woman for 17 years who's running his life. I mean, we'd love to feel sorry for victims, Excuse me, he's not a teenager. He's a grown-up. He can leave any time he likes. And I'm sorry to be rude, we all love to feel sorry for poor women victims. The same with a woman victim. But we blame everybody else. Oh, I can't, it's wrong, security, this and that. We love to feel sorry for victims. Excuse me. But we don't realize we have the power to choose. We are so childlike, children, and then we blame everybody else. So this is very powerful, to have the courage to know what conditions you need to become a better person. Do you understand? So anyway, the other one, forgiveness, is very interesting. You see, when you look at all the different states of mind in Buddhist psychology, they don't have a concept of forgiveness. And this is very weird to us. But let me unpack the logic of it, and you'll see exactly my point. So if we look at our culture, like I was saying right before, when we think about morality, I mean, the Christian teachings have been 2,000 years, huge part of our culture. We know that. It's immersed. And even though we might not be Christian any longer, still the assumptions are there very strong. And that's the dualistic view of God, a person who creates morality. God, I'm not criticizing, just looking at the evolution of it. So God is the creator. God made me. God made everybody else. God made the laws, and God must be obeyed. So when I'm a naughty girl, how you purify that is I confess to God and God forgives me. Right? You agree? That's where it comes from. So, because it's a definition of what negative is. So if you and I are living together and I'm mean to you, this is the point here, gets a bit unhappy a bit, but because I'm frantic for you not to hate me, my attachment to reputation is so desperate, I don't want you to give me up yet, so of course I'm going to ask you to forgive me. There's some good things there, but mostly it's attachment to reputation. I'm desperate, and I see your face and you say, yes, Robina, it's all right, I still love you, darling, and I'm really relieved, I feel I'm off the hook now. So forgiveness is great, and we must do it anyway. I'll get to the point. But the way we purify our neurosis, we ask you to forgive me. But until the purification process with no time tonight, we're going to be able to have a chance to do the 4 opponent powers and everything. Is that coming somewhere? I'll just find time to do it. Never mind what the titles are. I don't know. I'll do it. Okay. We'll go into this later. The whole purification process in Buddhism, you regret first what you did wrong. Not because someone says you shouldn't, but because you know it will poison you, it will harm you. So you regret. Then you think, whom can I turn to? So if I'm a Christian, I would turn to God and I'd say, God, please forgive me. Or I'm the materialist, I go to you, I say, please forgive me. Then my being a better person is defined by your forgiving me. So then that's what you do as a Christian. But the Buddhist one, that's not enough. And I turn to Buddha, not because he's my creator, but because he's like my doctor. He's got the medicine that I want to use that will purify me. Then you take the medicine, the 3rd step, and the 4th step, and the most important is I vow not to do it again. And that's what helps me change. Not just you getting me off the hook, because the ego wants forgiveness. But because I have decided, I promise you, I'll say to you, I promise I won't do it again. That's what makes me change. So the point is now the flip side of forgiveness, when it's like a lot of my friends in prison, because they've killed people, they just want to kill themselves because they feel now I'm an evil person, I'll go to hell, and because they can't forgive me because they're dead, I can never change. So our view of, this is the one of attachment to reputation again, because we assume I'm a good person only if someone forgives me. Then you think, but that's wrong. So being forgiven is often to do with ego. And it doesn't purify. It's a bonus to be forgiven. Do you see my point? Now, from the other point of view, to forgive others, the Buddhists will talk about compassion. That's the point. Compassion is the point. Compassion meaning, if you've harmed me, let's say, So the normal world would be, I should forgive you, or can I forgive you? Am I able to forgive you? And it's very hard. So you've got to have a logical reason for forgiving. If I'm a Christian, there would be a logical reason. It's because you've also got God within you. God made you and God made me. That would be the reason that I would forgive you if I was a Christian. Do you agree? Do you see my point? But if I can't find it in me to forgive you because you did do a bad thing, then I might never forgive you. And this is where it gets very difficult. I bitter myself, and I'm not helping myself. So forgiveness is certainly powerful for me. But the Buddhist way of talking is to have compassion for you. And that we can only have if I first have compassion for myself, understanding why I suffer, and I have renunciation. Then I've got that. Then I know I have compassion for you because you are harming yourself. Because you will suffer from what you've done to me. And that's the basis of compassion. So when I have this, then forgiveness is natural. It would happen naturally. Of course I forgive you. But so it's a different way of thinking. Do you see my point? Does that make sense?
Yes,
okay.
very much.
Good, good, okay. I mean, really compassion, and I'm sure we'll have a chance to talk about this too, the understanding of it from the Buddhist point of view is based on understanding karma. It's only limited compassion if we don't have that. Because the real level of compassion in Buddhism is compassion for everybody, especially the ones who are the evil ones. You know, for me, we understand this. Like a mother, you know, let's say you've got a junkie kid. He's a heroin addict. Everybody else hates him. He lies, he steals, he's horrible to be around. But the mother, her heart breaks for him because she can see he's harming himself. And that's the basis of real compassion. But we can't have that. Like if Holiness says compassion's not enough, you've got to have wisdom, he also says compassion's not enough, you've got to have renunciation. Compassion is based on renunciation. And renunciation is two things. One, I am sick of suffering. You've got to know your own suffering. And that means all kinds of suffering. Not just the gross suffering. I've got to be sick of suffering. But the crucial point about renunciation, and this is really like compassion for yourself, I finally know why I'm suffering. My karma and my delusions. When I've got this really inside me, this is like compassion for myself. This is what renunciation is. Then it's easy to have compassion for others. Because why? One, because they're suffering, but now you know why they're suffering. Same reason as me. Their karma and their delusions. This comes slowly, you know. And we'll talk about this, I'm sure. Time to go. Food for thought. So we just think, we'll do the prayers, but we think, here we've been, nearly 2 hours, whatever. As many thoughts as we've all had, including me. I'm listening just as much, believe me. It's true, really, I am. Each moment there has been in this 2 hours is as many thoughts every one of us has had. And every one of those thoughts is a karma. We've just sown millions of seeds, you know, in our mind this last 2 hours. So we think, how marvelous. How marvelous. May we nourish these seeds from this moment forward with our effort, with our work, with our practice, our sincerity, our aspirations to do what's most beneficial, so that we can nourish them to grow in the future in the development of our amazing potential, as we prayed in the beginning, to be a Buddha for the sake of every single suffering sentient being, no matter how long it takes. Thinking like this. Okay.
Vamos a la oración de larga vida y luego a la dedicación. Madre Tare, liberando del samsara. Tu Tare, liberando de los 8 temores. Tara, Madre que liberas. Por favor, otorga el don de la longevidad. Por las bendiciones de los gurús raíz y del linaje, por los logros espirituales de los Yidan, dioses y diosas, por los métodos hábiles de las dakinis y los protectores del Dharma, que podamos realizar gozosamente la esencia de nuestras esperanzas. Gendun Tenzin, eres afable, benevolente y bondadoso. Por favor, permanece con nosotros durante una larga vida. Expande tus actividades iluminadas en todas las direcciones y continúa madurando y sustentándonos a mí y a todos los seres sintientes. Desde este momento y durante todas nuestras vidas, manténnos bajo tu tutela. Sé nuestro amigo, nuestro divino y virtuoso guía. Limpia la degeneración de la ignorancia. Ayúdanos a realizar rápidamente nuestro recorrido por los senderos y caminos y alcanzar los 3 cuerpos de un Buda. Por la verdad de la realidad incambiable, y por la bendición conjunta de la indestructible Sangha, que la esencia de estas oraciones se logre rápidamente. Que por los méritos de esta virtud pueda alcanzar rápidamente el estado de un Guru Buda, y pueda llevar a ese estado a todo ser sin excepción. La mente de iluminación es suprema y muy preciada. Que donde no ha surgido surja, que donde ha surgido no disminuya, que cobre cada vez más fuerza. La visión correcta del vacío es suprema y muy preciada. Que donde no ha surgido surja, que donde ha surgido no disminuya, que cobre cada vez más fuerza. Así como el valiente Manjushri y Samantabhadra distinguieron los fenómenos tal cual son, yo también dedico estos méritos en la mejor forma, siguiendo su ejemplo perfecto. Dedico todas estas raíces de virtud con la dedicación que es considerada la mejor por los victoriosos asidos de los tres tiempos para poder realizar todas las buenas obras.
That's it? Done? Thank you very much. See you tomorrow? Tomorrow? Okay, some of you. All right. Thank you so much, everybody. Very happy. Thank you.
Recuerden, mañana a las 7 de la noche volvemos a tener otra enseñanza de la Venerable. Mañana también vamos a tener sopas antes de que comience la clase para que así puedan estar mucho mejor.